Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. All right, welcome to the ICSB World Congress plenary session. My name is Ayman Tarabishi. I am the President and CEO of the International Council for Small Business, and I am just delighted to be here to be moderating this session. This should be an amazing session, a high impact session, and if I just read you the title, you will understand why. The title of the session is The Missing 25 Million, Reducing the Gender Gap in Entrepreneurship in a Post-COVID World. With our partners, OECD, EPAC, and ESCA, we are just delighted to have you here in person and online. Before we get into the session, I would like to give a brief opening to set the context of this session, and then I will take some time to introduce all the keynote speakers briefly, and then when they present, I'll give them a full bio to show you the impact and their leadership. Let me start. 25 million. It's a number that feels so abstract, so far away, so unfathomable, so as to almost lose its meaning completely. 25 million. When you hear a number that large, summed up in 3 words, it feels like it couldn't possibly be that big, if so few words can describe it. But let me tell you something about the 25 million. It is roughly the population of Australia. Considering the gender gap in entrepreneurship, the OECD has estimated that if women were to participate in early stage entrepreneurship at the same rate as core age men, there could be an additional 25 million women entrepreneurs across OECD countries. We refer to this for today's session as the missing 25 million. These are women who already exist, who are alive on this planet and have not yet been able to tap into their talents and skills for many reasons. These women entrepreneurs are our future. They are our planet. They are our mothers, sisters, co-workers, colleagues, friends, wives, girlfriends, daughters, grandmothers. I hope I did not miss anyone, but they're so important. At the beginning of 2021, ICSB announced our #1 trend would be the evolution of the entrepreneur as womenpreneurs. We offered that there cannot be a we in the entrepreneurial community until we all step up and begin breaking down the barriers that continue to hold women back from their fullest potential. That is why today we are going to discuss those causes and what can be done to close this gap. Therefore, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you the keynotes and panelists for today's session. What I'd like to do now is briefly introduce everyone, and then when they speak, I'll give them a full bio so you understand who they are. Quickly, let me first introduce my colleague and partner for this World Congress, Dr. Salim Kaufman. Then I would like to introduce also a dynamic person that has been the engine and the energy behind a lot of the efforts, Professor Barbara Orser. And she is online, so she met Wade. Then I would like to also introduce Professor Colette Henry. Then also the panelists, Chiara Condi, and then also Dina Bennett and Claire Savy and Dr. Elizabeth Vasquez. These are our panelists and our keynote speakers, and they are formidable. So let me first start by the first keynote speaker and give you a little bit about her bio, because I believe it is as impactful as what she is saying, but also understanding her background and what she has accomplished. So I want to take time to present this. Celine Kaufman is the head of the Entrepreneurship, SME, and Tourism Division at the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities at OECD. She joined OECD in 2001. She has a PhD in economics from La Sorbonne. Previously responsible for coordinating the OECD work on the annual Africa Development Bank, OECD African Economic Outlook Report. She led the work on private sector participation in infrastructure as part of the OECD program on sustainable financing for water and sanitation. Celine, we are delighted to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Evan. It's a pleasure to be here today, in particular together with that very distinguished panel that is connecting also remotely. And it's a pleasure in particular to introduce our report on entrepreneurship policies through a gender lens and debate the very critical issues and supporting policies that this report is about. Let me first start by saying that this report was prepared in partnership between the OECD and the Global Women's Entrepreneurship Policy Research Project. And I really would like to thank the GWEP for this important collaboration, in particular Professor Colette Henry, who is the chair of the network and will be addressing you shortly. So to us, analyzing female entrepreneurship and investigating ways of putting a more gender-sensitive approach at the heart of policies has been a very high priority for many years. It was a key feature of the 2013 OECD recommendation on gender equality in education, employment, and entrepreneurship, to which all OECD countries committed. And ever since, but even before, the OECD has been monitoring trends in female entrepreneurship, publishing analytical reports, country assessments, and gathering important data. And with the European Commission in particular, we've developed an online self-assessment tool and guidance materials for policymakers with a key pillar on women entrepreneurship called the Better Entrepreneurship Policy. One of the key deliverable publications that the OECD publishes regularly on the topic is the biennial Missing Entrepreneurs. It tracks women's entrepreneurship activity, the barriers they face, and the most effective policy instruments. And just watch out for the next edition because it's coming out in October 2021, so this year. It will be focusing on the gender gap in self-employment, and it will be showing, you'll find from that report, that we estimate that the gender gap in self-employment has closed by about 15% between 2002 and 2019. But the gap, that's an average. The gap is still very large in many countries. And in addition, what the report puts forward is that unfortunately the COVID crisis has reversed some of the progress that we could see happening in the past, over in particular the last 2 decades. And we know that women entrepreneurs have been hit disproportionately by this crisis. partly because they are actually overrepresented in sectors that were hit the hardest, typically tourism, hospitality, personal services, but also because the restrictions that were put in place to face the crisis, the pandemic, impacted women the most. Just to give you an example, women entrepreneurs were, for example, 25% more likely to report that homeschooling and childcare had a negative impact on their business compared to male entrepreneurs in 2020. So unequal impacts of the crisis. And despite the overall success of the emergency support measures that governments have introduced to support vulnerable firms and entrepreneurs to survive the crisis, women have had particular challenges and difficulties in getting this support. In particular, what we find through that report and other work that we've been doing, we launched a couple of weeks ago the Outlook on SMEs and entrepreneurs. We find that the COVID support measures for entrepreneurs were generally not gender sensitive. They were broad-based to try and reach out as much as they could more businesses and entrepreneurs. But many of these programs typically relied on traditional mechanisms, on bank products. They were based on revenue, and women entrepreneurs have had greater difficulties traditionally to access these programs because they operate on average smaller businesses and are less likely to access bank loans. So globally, if you look at the numbers across the OECD countries, women-owned businesses had a higher closure rate than main businesses in 2020. 27% likelihood of closing compared to 20% for men. So looking at the numbers, looking at the trends, there's still a huge challenge ahead of us as we look to close the gender gap in entrepreneurship. Obviously, the recovery packages that countries are putting in place provide an important opportunity to boost our efforts to tackle the barriers that women face and to promote female entrepreneurship. This is not actually just a matter of fairness, but also a matter of growth. Some estimates, for example, suggest that global GDP could rise by as much as 2% annually if we could eliminate the gender gap in entrepreneurship by releasing innovation and making better use of resources. There is a growth potential there that is still untapped. And it's important going forward that the recovery packages, the policies that are put in place, can unlock that reserve. And so what that report that we are discussing today does is actually to provide some policy insights from around the world and acts as a guide for future policy actions to support women entrepreneurs. And just in a nutshell, the report underlines 3 key messages for government. The first is that more ambitious, coordinated, and sustained policies and programs are needed to promote women's entrepreneurship. The report already highlights a number of good examples of these policies that are being put in place. Just a couple to give you some examples. In Germany, and you have to pardon my German accent, the Frauen Untermieten Initiative, the Women Entrepreneurs Initiative, has built a network of nearly 200 entrepreneurship role models and mentors to inspire the next generation of women entrepreneurs. But there are more examples. Another one is what Canada has been doing by establishing the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy back in 2018 that sought to double the number of women-owned businesses by 2026. And that program supports women entrepreneurs through targeted capital, improve access to federal contracting, and a women entrepreneurship knowledge hub. Despite these good examples, and they exist across countries, what we find in that report is that the initiatives around the world remain too fragmented and too short-term maybe to have the impact that they should have. Many initiatives are vulnerable to economic and political changes, and we need to create solid underpinning policy frameworks to make change happen. The second message from the report is that women's entrepreneurship policy interventions must be tailored to the local context. The report describes the very different institutions, culture, and social norms that affect the opportunities and outcomes for women entrepreneurs. And policies need to be sensitive to these differences. Just to give you an example, in OECD countries, for example, like the US, the UK, Australia, policies tend to focus on developing the local entrepreneurial ecosystem, for example, by providing infrastructure such as incubators, accelerators, startup funding, and by providing or supporting the networks for women. For good reasons, policies in developing countries tend to focus more on the foundational challenges to gender equity. In these countries, government needs to create the legal and regulatory frameworks that supports women's entrepreneurship and tackles discrimination. But in many cases, the approach would need to combine the two perspectives and to provide a balance between those policies. And very importantly, governments need to engage women in a dialogue, not only to identify and to deepen their understanding of the barriers that women face, but also to involve women in key institution and decision making. This includes, for example, establishing advisory bodies that engage women's entrepreneurship organizations to guide policy making. The third and last key message I want to highlight from the report is that the test and learn approach can help identify and scale up programs that work. We need to strengthen our evidence of the impact of women's entrepreneurship policies and programs. This will be key to expand and develop policies that are effective. To support that, we need better data on the state of women's entrepreneurship, including about the characteristics of the businesses created and operated by women and by men, the barriers they face, and the beneficiaries of entrepreneurship support program. And we also need more policy evaluation as a foundation for scaling up policy initiatives. So as you can imagine, the OECD stands ready to support this agenda going forward. In particular, we are committed to gather the data, to support governments in developing their policies, in undertaking the relevant ex-post evaluation, so that we create the foundation and the frameworks for women's entrepreneurship. We are proud as the OECD to be supporting countries in their work to promote women's entrepreneurship. And this report that we're launching now is another key milestone on that way. So again, I would like to thank very much our partner, ICSB, but also the GWPEP for collaborating with us on this important work. And we look forward to continuing that work together to help unlock the talent and potential of women entrepreneurs through the recovery and beyond. With that, I look forward to the discussions on the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Celine. Next keynote speaker, I would like to introduce her, Professor Colette Henry. She is the chair of a very powerful and dynamic network, the Global Women's Entrepreneurship Policy, WEP, Research Network. And she is the head of the Department of Business Studies at Dundalk Institute of Technology, DIT, in Ireland. She is also the editor of the book, Female Entrepreneurship, Implications for Education, Training, and Policy. She is also the editor of the International Gender and Entrepreneurship. In her previous role as the president of the Institute for Small Business and Entrepreneurship, ISBE. In 2015, she is the recipient of the Diana International Trailblazer Award for her work on women's entrepreneurship research. It is so wonderful to have you here online with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eamon. So, can I say bonjour? C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. And I just wish I was in Paris to join you all. And I want to thank ICSB and the OECD for organizing this session and for inviting us along. I really have to take my hat off to you, Eamon and Celine, because organizing a hybrid conference like this, it's so comprehensive. So I just wish I was there to participate, but hopefully next year. So all I want to do over the next few minutes is to go through some of the key findings from the report. I want to thank, obviously, Jonathan and David at the OECD, who were very much involved in this report. It was a fantastic collaboration. And of course, my excellent co-editors, Barbara Orser, Susan Coleman, and finally the 27 global WEP country teams who contributed to this report. So I want to talk about some of the key findings and perhaps put more of a focus onto the future. So now that we've produced the report, where do we go from here? So I think there are a few slides. I think, is it Hannah or Heather are going to put them up for me? That's great. So if we could have the next slide, please. So you will be familiar, of course, with the OECD and the ICSB, but you may not be so familiar with Global WEP. So as Eamon said, we are the Women's Entrepreneurship Policy Research Network. We are a group of academic scholars very much engaged in women's enterprise policy and wanting to do research and gather data and publish on that topic, and of course share our findings. We started out of the Diana conference in 2014 in Stockholm, one of their many conferences. And basically we started this on the back of an envelope, as many good things do start. We had about a half a dozen or so interested research groups who wanted to work with us. Very quickly, we ratcheted that up somewhat, and we held our first workshop with 13 countries represented. So that very quickly grew. And as I said, we have 27 countries who have contributed to the report, but we now have 35 member teams from around the world. So we're really pleased with that. And this particular report represents a really fantastic collaboration between the OECD and Global WEP, and we're absolutely delighted to be involved with it. So if we could have the next slide, please. So if you've had a chance to look at the report, and I hope you have, there are lots of ways that you can consider the findings. I find this particular framework interesting because it sort of highlights some of the more novel or deeper findings. So in summary, our research teams in the first instance found from the data we collected that there are some countries with no women's entrepreneurship policy at all. Now, that's not entirely surprising, but at Global WEP, we consider that to be a fundamental flaw in supporting women's entrepreneurship policy. Because if governments are serious about promoting equality in entrepreneurship, then they've really got to embed women's entrepreneurship into their overarching national policy framework or strategy. So this wasn't an entirely uncommon finding at all. In many countries, either there was no dedicated policy on women's entrepreneurship, or the references within the mainstream overarching policy were fleeting or indeed barely visible. In Ireland, for example, or Northern Ireland, our research team there are adamant that the lack of a dedicated women's entrepreneurship policy has directly contributed to the lagging behind of women entrepreneurs compared to their male counterparts. Now, we also found some countries where there were policies designed to promote women's entrepreneurship, even if they weren't specifically dedicated to women's entrepreneurship policy, they were defined within the overarching policy, but some of those policies didn't seem to work. And a number of countries fell into that category, and the main reason we felt for that was because a lot of the policies being proposed did not link up suitably well with the rest of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So in other words, in some cases, there were policies introduced, but they were relying on aspects of the entrepreneurial ecosystem that perhaps either didn't exist or weren't well developed. Perhaps a slightly unexpected example in this regard is Germany, because despite all the strides that they've made in recent years in terms of women's entrepreneurship, our research team there felt that most policies are still designed around the male breadwinner model role, and that entrepreneurship is presented in a way so as not to be appealing to women. And perhaps a more surprising example might be a country like Pakistan, where the levels of women's entrepreneurship are amongst the lowest in the world. And here the research team highlighted the weak regulatory systems that facilitate discrimination, limited access to financial capital, and the lack of family and social care policies as key ecosystem issues that were working against the introduction of any policy related to women's entrepreneurship. Then we found, thankfully, some countries with women's entrepreneurship policy initiatives that did appear to work well, perhaps with some minor critiques here and there. Some good practice examples, as Celine has already mentioned, include Canada with their dedicated women entrepreneurship strategy. And I'm sure Barbara will talk to us later a little bit about that. And also in the UK, where an initiative called the Women in Innovation Awards has proved really successful in encouraging more women to innovate and highlighting their innovative achievements. Now, our research teams also uncovered some countries that with policies that supported women's entrepreneurship, but with no actual programs on the ground, or only partial programs in operation. Now, one example in this regard could be that could be considered is Kenya, where women constitute almost half of micro to small enterprises, and they represent the largest proportion of entrepreneurs within the informal sector. And yet, despite the fact that the government will acknowledge this in their policies and strategies, there is no program of social protection for women in the informal sector. In some other countries, policies just lack the necessary targets, specific criteria or evaluation framework that would be required to make any subsequent programs effective. And then finally, within this framework, our research teams found some countries where there were really excellent programs on the ground targeted at women's entrepreneurship, but there was no overarching policy. And again, as I said before, for Global WEP, this is particularly important because when you think of it, if women's entrepreneurship is not embedded in a country's overarching national policy framework, then, and there's no mandate to promote it, then any good program on the ground is at risk of losing its funding, or perhaps some of its key staff or champions who've been passionate about this issue. So one example there is Mexico, where they have some really good funding programs, for example, without an overarching policy. So the Mujeres Moviendo Mexico, for example, is a good initiative on the ground. So if we go to the next slide, please. So maybe just looking to the future now, I think having completed this report at Global WEP, we feel that future initiatives need to focus on moving away from this notion of women being, I suppose, portrayed as just a minority group, disadvantaged, lacking in skills, in deficit, or needing to be fixed, as very often they are portrayed in some policy documents. So we need to move away from that. We've already said that women's entrepreneurship needs to be embedded in the national entrepreneurship policy frameworks of countries. And that will provide longevity and sustainability of any good programs that already exist. And we need to have frameworks that support the sorts of things that women need in entrepreneurship and not be solely based on the traditional male model of entrepreneurship. Now, it seems to us that perhaps within all of these debates that evaluation is something that's really missing as a key element in current policy and programme provision. Policies and programmes also need to be better linked to the wider entrepreneurial ecosystem. And of course, that's going to involve in the future stakeholders working much more closely together to design policies and programmes. We noticed in the report that this issue of the lack of financial capital is just a recurrent issue. In fact, when we first started out on the report, almost all of our research teams wanted to write about that topic. And we had to persuade them to look at other issues just so that it wouldn't all just be about finance. But it is surprising that that continues to be an issue for women entrepreneurs around the world. So much more work is needed on targeted financial supports that really work. A recurring issue, and one that is particularly surprising to me, is that many of the more robust policies and programs that are available for women entrepreneurs are focused on sectors where women do not predominate. Now, I know there is a good economic argument for focusing on the high tech, high growth, but those numbers in terms of new businesses will continue to be small. So we must not forget the millions of women's businesses that are not in the high tech, high growth sector. So we really do need to be putting more support in there. An easy fix for this, or a part fix, might be simply just to include more women in the design and delivery of women's entrepreneurship programs. And Selena has already alluded to that. Because I suppose finally, we know that when it comes to entrepreneurship policy, one size just doesn't fit all. So hopefully some of those things can go toward trying to find this missing 25 million. So just one more slide, please, final slide. So again, just looking to the future, what is Global WEP's agenda in all of this? And we operate across 3 pillars mainly. The first one is connecting with policymakers. Now we've produced this report, we've been encouraging our country teams around the world to engage with their local and national agencies just to get the word out, to draw their attention to what's happening around the world. Our members get asked to contribute to lots of debates, and of course that's a great way of getting the word out as well and sharing our findings. And we hold workshops, and of course we'll invite local policymakers where we can. The second stream we focus on is academic publications. We've had, in addition to this report, we've had a number of journal articles published based on the work of the Global WEP group. We've had some special issues. We have just finished one for the International Small Business Journal, and that is due out, I'm told, in November. We've just secured one with the International Journal of Entrepreneurial Behaviour and Research, which has just been upgraded to a 3-star on the ABS. So that's very nice. And we'll be working on that, putting a call out soon. So anyone interested would be very welcome to contribute. And we have a number of books currently commissioned with Global WEP. I think we've got about 3 on the go at the minute and another 2 to come. A lot of our team would produce blogs and policy briefs. And again, this is a great way to disseminate findings and make new connections. And finally, we really do like to collaborate. This collaboration with the OECD has been fantastic. We'd love to do more. We collaborate with Way Forward, who will be hosting a workshop in a few months with us. We're in discussions with Quantum Leaps, who are identifying some key policy issues that we might look at for them. And of course, we'll host our next workshop just prior to the Diana conference next year. So again, the message I want to send is that we're open to new collaborations. And again, I think it's only in working together that we'll try and find some solution to this missing 25 million. So I leave it there. Thank you very much. So I think it's over to you, Eamon.
Sorry. Wait, one more. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm saying there was a lot of applause here in the room. so I'm not sure if you heard it, but there was applause. But
Oh, lovely.
and also from our front, from ICSB front, we want to thank DIT. They hosted the ICSB World Congress in 2014 with Professor Tom Cooney as well. So we were just delighted to have you us hosted there. And they were one of the first congresses around the world to go paperless, right? And the theme of their conference was on sustainability. So as you can see, there's a theme of innovation, of moving forward. So Professor Colette, thank you again for a wonderful, wonderful keynote talk. Let us move next to our next keynote speaker, Chiara Condi. She is the creator of a nonprofit called Led by Her. Just magnificent title, just absolutely fantastic. Led by Her challenges gender-based violence from an innovative angle and encourages women's entrepreneurship through the values of collaboration, mutual support, and community. Chiara began her career at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, which was in our first panel session today. It's a small world after all. Working in gender impact. She's also previously spoken at the UN Women's Day Conference in 2019, and Women's Day is March 8th. So with that, let's give Chiara a wonderful hand, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm really, really happy to be with you today. And I have to say that what I did in 2013 when I set up Led by Her was very innovative. So it might sound like today it could sound mainstream, but when I went in 2013 and I was 25 years old, and I said, I really want to build this nonprofit, and I have a dream, and I want to help women who have suffered from violence, and I want to help them rebuild their lives by helping them become entrepreneurs. Everybody thought I was completely crazy, because they thought there's no way that we're going to take the most vulnerable and the people who have the hardest time in life, and we're going to put them through the hardest challenge of all, which is becoming an entrepreneur, as you know. So I went to different business schools and I pitched them the idea, and they said yes right away, and they really believed in my program. So I started in 2014, and we've been running ever since. And when I started this, there was really nobody else doing this. And now I see more and more programs and more programs that we're also collaborating with that are replicating our model and helping women who have lived through these difficulties in life rebuild their lives through entrepreneurship. So I'm very, very happy that now entrepreneurship is one not only reserved to an elite group of women, and that it is also accessible and democratized to women with different backgrounds, different challenges, different levels of education, and different paths in life. So women who have no networks, and women who would not dare to take the steps towards entrepreneurship. And Led by Her has helped over 150 women in the last several years, and we have about 40% who go on to create entrepreneurial ventures. But what we've also learned through the Led by Her model is that entrepreneurship is also a fantastic way for leading life transformation. So we say that the first thing in our program is to become CEO of your own life and to transform your life. And that entrepreneurship actually teaches you that. Entrepreneurship empowers you to be the entrepreneur of your life. And then from that, you can create a project, and you can create 2 projects, and you can do lots of things in life once you have that kind of empowerment. And so we really believe that also entrepreneurship, just as teaching, has a value in of itself, whether you go on to create the project or not. It creates a whole different mindset and a whole set of opportunities that were not accessible to you without that teaching. So we really believe in the value of entrepreneurship training and teaching, and we really believe that it can really transform women's lives, and that entrepreneurship can also be accessible to the women who have the hardest time in life. So we have been working on creating and building on that model. And I think it's not a coincidence that, for example, 1/3 of our program is personal development, because we really believe that we're not only working on the project, but we're also working on the person at the same time as the project. So we really have worked on entrepreneurship as a way of personal transformation, and we really put value in what you learn during the program. You know, whether you succeed or whether you fail, whether you become an entrepreneur or not, where there is no failure, because even if they don't become entrepreneurs, they go and they get jobs that they wouldn't have without our teaching. So we really think that entrepreneurship is really powerful, but today it still remains accessible to a very small portion of the population, and even fewer women access it, and even fewer women who come from difficult backgrounds have access to entrepreneurship teaching and training. So we really are asking ourselves these questions: how can really entrepreneurship be democratized so that we can have more fantastic transformation stories like the ones we have at Led by Her? Because there is no reason really that they should be isolated cases. This could really be any woman who goes through this and who builds a project on sort of turmoil ground. I've realized through working with women entrepreneurs that it's really important, like you all have said, to focus on not only our program, which is on the ground, but also on what is going around to support women entrepreneurs. Because me as a program, I can only do so much. I can only help them so much, right? So if I help them through teaching and training, if they don't get the access to the financing, or if they don't get access to procurement, and opportunities, if they have trouble because they can't take their children to daycare, and have options for that, then all these things make my program less good in a way, because as good as I can make it, I can't work in a system that doesn't give me all those other elements that ensure the success of women entrepreneurs. And I think this is a really big problem that I've seen, especially working with a more fragile population, especially working with women entrepreneurs who are in a large majority single mothers, for example, and have, significant challenges. What I've seen is that often we just ignore that. So we just say, you want to be an entrepreneur? Well, okay, we're going to encourage women to be entrepreneurs, but we're not going to think about, where are they going to leave their children, about other social policies to help them. Being an entrepreneur is still a lot riskier in many countries than if you're an employee, because you don't have a lot of things to fall back on, and you don't, you're on your own, and if your business fails, you don't get a lot of help. So all these things can make it a lot riskier and a lot more difficult for women, especially women in certain situations, to take the risk in reality and say, I am going to become an entrepreneur. And we think that these things just don't matter, that if somebody's motivated enough, they'll do it. And to some extent that's true, but for many women, these things really do hold them back on a day-to-day basis. And I think these things should not be overlooked. And there should also be a lot more, I believe, financing of women-only programs, because when I look at my programs around me that are so-called mixed, I see that they're 90 to 80% male. So those mixed programs are not really helping the same people that I'm helping. So there should really be targeted funds that are dedicated to women, specifically for women, and that help organizations like mine, which partner with business schools to provide training for women entrepreneurs. And I think training is magic. Training is the key. And I see that all the entrepreneurs and women we've helped, they would have never become entrepreneurs without training. So you need to make the investment in actually creating more projects, because a lot of times I see and people say we don't have any women projects to fund. Well, if you don't have any women projects to start with, then you won't have any to fund. So I think it's really important when we're talking about women entrepreneurship to start really early in the pipeline and really helping even women who have an idea. I mean, we just created an ideation program, just even before you want to become an entrepreneur, test your idea, come, the stakes are low, you can test it out. And so we really need to be pushing women just to going from that idea phase, or I think I could be an entrepreneur, give them the nudge, give them the encouragement, give them the training, so that then they can actually take that step. And I think that's the problem that we are at. And that's the problem at the beginning of the pipeline that we need to fix if we want to see more projects along the pipeline, because I think it is still really far from fixed. And I see that when there are programs that are dedicated for women, when there are programs that are dedicated to early stage, all these things really do make a difference in reality of an individual saying, is this for me or is it not? Can I do this? Can I not? What is entrepreneurship? And all these questions that one might be asking oneself in the beginning, and one might quickly discourage oneself in the beginning through answering those questions. So I really do think that it's important to find the support and to build the support, and then to really build that chain of entrepreneurial support in overall policy and in everything, and in everything that is done to encourage women. And I think it's really important because we are doing a lot in terms of thinking about women getting fair pay and women getting other benefits and equality in companies. But I think we are definitely, as countries, not pulling our weight when it's about women in self-employment and women in entrepreneurship, and assuring that we take into account this population, and assuring that it's possible for this population to actually become entrepreneurs. So I really think investing in programs like ours is a great idea, because we can make this happen on the ground, and we are the ones who can actually pull women who are doing other things and say, hey, well, we can help you become entrepreneurs, and we can be that bridge, but we need the support. So that's what I wanted to add, and I'm very, very happy to be talking about Led by Her and everything that we've accomplished in these years. And I think that the biggest reward is when we talk about Led by Her, and people ask women who have been participating in our program, what has Led by Her done for you? What has Led by Her given you? There hasn't been a single time that somebody said, oh, Led by Her helped me open my shop, or Led by Her helped me learn what a business plan is, or Led by Her helped me make a marketing plan. No, nobody's ever said that. Everybody always says, Led by Her transformed my life. And I think that's the biggest gift that we could ask for. And I think that's the power of entrepreneurship programs, and that's the power of entrepreneurship for women, and that has a multiplier effect that we can't even fathom once these women become entrepreneurs, and the good that it can do in the ecosystem. So I really think we have to all do everything that we can to make a huge push and create more stories like that.
All right, and this is a global best practice. We commend you for it. Let's give her a big round of applause. If your laptop is shaking, that means you heard the applause. So just to let you know. Okay, and next we have a presenter here with us in person. I want to introduce her because I want you just to listen to her bio, right? And some of it is in French, so I apologize if I mispronounce things, but I'll try my best. Claire Sadi is Vice President of the National Fédération des Femmes, a network of 8 incubators for women entrepreneurs. She is also the founder and CEO of Tipeee Formation et Conseil, created in 2008. On top of this, she is also the Deputy Mayor of Lyon, 7th, Delegate for the Economy, Entrepreneurship and Gender Equality from 2014 to 2020. She is an author of the book Pour une conduite du projet créatif et responsable. And I apologize for mispronouncing every word. But it's it's an advanced edition. I'm not going to pronounce this word, so I'm sorry. Right? She is a trainer at ENA, National School of Administration. She is the founder of the Women's Economic Network. She is an officer of the National Order of Merit. She is former HR manager of the IGS Group in Lyon. It is just absolutely amazing. An author, an entrepreneur. Amazing. The floor is yours. Thank you. One question I want to start with here, listening to all the different keynote speakers ahead of time, and I'm going to make it a little bit difficult. I want you to integrate your experiences, the successes and the not successes, and answer this question. What can governments do to help support women now?
Thank you, and I know it's a very easy question to answer. I'm going to do it right now. And thank you for your French. It's not too bad. So yeah, what could government do in terms of policy? I think a lot of things. I can just give you the examples of the incubators Les Premières that I have funded in Lyon, and we have a very concrete coaching for women entrepreneurs, and it's very dedicated to them. As Colette Henry told before, and Chiara Condi, we have really to design the coaching for them, because classical coaching isn't working. And of course that we make them good entrepreneurs like men, because you have to have the same skill if you're an entrepreneur, even whether you're a man or a woman, of course, but you don't face the same barriers. So we have really to design some soft skills for women. And what was really a good practice here in Lyon is that because of the success of our incubator, we have accompanied more than 2,000 businesses and women, and we have created a lot of employment, of course, on the territory, Because of that, the classical incubators just told us, oh, how have you done to have so many women? We tried that for years, and we have only 5 or 10% of women, but we don't attract them. We don't know how to make them come here in our classical deep tech incubators or fintech incubators, for example. And they ask us, well, just come inside our coaching program, and you will just train women on the soft skill part. And we've done that. We've done a lot of partnership with Deep Tech Incubator Pulsalis, with H7, it's a big incubator in Lyon, and it works a lot. It works really. A lot of women are coming in this field, so that's good. But what I want to say, my word here, is to say that I don't know if it is to women to adapt to the actual economic world. I don't know if it's to her to fit to this system. What I want to say is that women, they innovate in innovation, in fact. They just investigate fields of the economy that are not yet investigated by men. And for example, in the care sector or in the solidarity sector, and usually they want to create their business in a personal development optic too. Not only to have a different relationship with work. And that is very interesting because they want to transform their life, yeah, as Chiara said. But I think that they want to transform the economy too. They really want to make an economic world with a more common sense that is just targeting happiness, for example. Not only the GDP, the gross domestic product, but why not a gross happiness product too? And how do you want women to be at ease in a world where they have to pitch, for example? I give you another example. Some business angels in the United States, they have realized that because of the pitch, they had very few women accessing to raise money, to raise fund, because women, they don't like to pitch, they don't like to boast, they don't like to, you see, to say I'm the best. They are less likely to take risks and they are more cautious, and it's a good thing. When you're an entrepreneur, to be cautious is good, I think. And so these business angels in the United States, they decided just not to make the pitch exercise. They decided to be insensitive to gender in the applicant's documents, for example, and they just made 80% more women funded by them. So it's very interesting. And as you can see, it's all the systems that has to be reformed. It's not only the way we accompany women in incubator, it's the financial field. It's a policymaker who has to think of the impact of the policy before taking the law, you see? Not only, sometimes it's very surprising. You take what seems a good law that will help everyone, but when you assess it very closely, you just realize that the impact will be very different on men and women. So in Lyon, the ecological party that has been elected 1 year ago, they decided to have a gender-sensitive budget. And they just want to be certain that it will be fair for women and men, all the decisions they will take. So it's a very long answer, sorry, to your small question, but perhaps you have another?
Yes. So I love the way you bridged both the micro and the macro together. Sometimes it's a tough balancing act between both. But from your experience and leadership, what are maybe 1 or 2 things we say we should look at this even more or further explore? You might not have the answer, but there's something in the back of your mind saying, I've been thinking about this, and I think this is something that we should further explore. What might that be?
For me, there's a lot of things, but for me, because we are accompanying higher potential startups, so in innovation, we want everyone to innovate, of course, women too. I think that we have to reconsider the definition of innovation. Really, what is innovation? We have made a lot of progress in material comfort. I've got a lot of admiration for scientists and the medical sector, the health sector. We can go to space and it's fantastic. I like it, it's no problem. But what is really innovation for? I think that the goal of life is to be happy, no? It's to have physical comfort, but not only, it's to have mental comfort, moral comfort. I think that we lose this sense, this common sense, and it's a shame. And I'm sure that women can change that. And if we redefine innovation, we will perhaps have another goals and of world, of economic world. And I think that we should look further at that. And perhaps we could, what I have advised the SME minister for too, is perhaps to have a benefit of unemployment for entrepreneurs too. You see, like an help that will be dedicated to men and women, of course, but I think that this kind of measure will be better for women because they have they don't like to be put at risk. Perhaps the perspective to have an unemployment benefit if they fail their company, perhaps it will be easier for them to create a company.
This is wonderful. The theme of this conference, or this congress here, is humane entrepreneurship. And you've just alluded to the whole concept of humanity or humane entrepreneurship. Happiness is one of them, right? Looking and focusing on the woman and looking at it from a holistic perspective. So this is absolutely fantastic. We're going to come back to you, but I want to give everybody a chance to talk here. So let me introduce our next panelist here, Dina Bennett, and she has founded the International Consultants for Entrepreneurship and Enterprise. She is also an expert in policy and policy advisor to the European Economic and Social Committee, EESC. She is a former global lead enterprise development at Women Economic Imperative, and at 2005, she is the recipient of the Queen's Award for Enterprise Promotion, one of the first women to be honored with this award. I'm getting goosebumps just reading this, just to let you know. So, so Dina, you're online, but I have a question for you that I want to ask, right? You developed an initiative in the northeast of England, WIN, which became the UK's best practice initiative for supporting women's entrepreneurship. It supported many new businesses and helped others to scale. So you have impact and you have metrics because you've measured it, right? Here comes the question. Why do you think it was so successful? And how do you define success? The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, and well done to OECD and the Global Women's Enterprise Policy Group for the report. It's brilliant. It's just exactly what's needed as well. Thanks for that question, Ivan. Yes, I set up something called Women in the Network 20 years ago, which became the UK best practice for supporting women's entrepreneurship. And I was set up because I did a lot of work at Europe's foremost small business centre, led by Alan Gibb. And all my research was looking at what makes a successful small business. And in the early years, I didn't see any women coming through in my research. I was looking for them. I was thinking, don't women run businesses? Well, of course they do. So I actually set up another study to ask women, why don't you run businesses, or why aren't you featured anywhere? And one of the things that came out of the research was that social capital developed through networking was a very powerful way to develop business. And so going to networking events to develop social capital was very important, but there were very few women. Women were saying, I'm not treated as though I'm a woman in business, or I'm treated as somebody's secretary. That's changed, thankfully. But I think one of the reasons that this initiative became so successful was that we didn't want a membership. We had more than 24,000 members. We wanted membership churn to signpost women to the different networks, either geographically or suited to their type of business, that were better able to support them. But they were quite happy to stick with that because everything we did was around peer learning. We really dug deep to find out, why weren't women going for awards? Why weren't they being nominated? Why weren't they winning awards? And it's because everything was either so gender blind or gender neutral. All the systems and structures that were set up were just ignoring the needs of women. So we understood that women were not a homogeneous group. It's completely heterogeneous. And so we were developing different interventions to actually suit the different needs of different women. It could be rural women, urban women, women with childcare needs, women without childcare needs. And that's quite important because someone would say to us, I have children, but I have them, I'm able to manage that, or I can afford childcare. Please don't talk to me as a woman in business as though I need childcare. So it's recognizing the whole heterogeneous nature of that, which is very, very important. I think one of the other reasons it's successful is that we actually fed into policy. We were part of the first UK framework to support, a strategic framework to support women's entrepreneurship in the UK in 2003. A lot of work went into that. It was the most amazing document which other countries then took and used. But sadly, it was toothless because absolutely no resource went into it. So it's all very well saying we have a framework, saying we have policy, but if no resources are actually committed to ensuring those policies are actually enacted and supported, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So again, we started campaigning, saying, you know, what's going on here? We actually have to put resource behind this. So we see all through the years that policy support for women's enterprise, women's entrepreneurship has been incredibly fragmented, depending on what person or what government is in power, whether we have people that believe in small businesses, and that's another big issue. We used to become ambassadors to explain to people that small businesses are not mini corporates, and within that, the needs of women-owned businesses as well. I think many people who are developing policy look at the world through a very corporate lens, and small businesses don't operate like that at all. So we did a lot of work and really pushed for people to understand the life world of the women entrepreneur, to really get people to put themselves in their shoes to understand that. And with that, maybe they would have a better understanding of what policy and regulations would fit, would be appropriate, what would work and what wouldn't work. So this was very, very important. So everything that we did from a sort of pragmatic level, we then fed into policy level as well. But sadly, I still think many governments across the world still have a lot more work to do in terms of developing gender sensitive regulations and policy, but also making sure that's monitored and evaluated. So I think the success of that initiative was very much about understanding the needs of women entrepreneurs, educating people to help them put themselves in the shoes of those women's entrepreneurs when they were developing courses, policies, regulations, and then also feeding into policy as well. Are you asking a question? Because I can't hear anything.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
So I'm going to repeat myself to the audience, but I'm going to change a little bit here. I said, the idea seems simple, what you just mentioned, but the execution must have been incredible, right? Just to tie all the aspects together. How did you do it? What was it when you realized that we can do all three together at the same time?
It's really interesting. I've learned so many lessons from this project as well. And when anyone is starting a new initiative around supporting women's entrepreneurship, and they sometimes feel as though they're not getting anywhere, I say it takes at least 3 years to get any traction. When I used to network like crazy and go to so many different events. And when I had Women into the Network on my badge, no one wanted to speak to me. So I had to change that and put Durham University Business School, which is where I worked. I was okay to be spoken to then. But then after about 3 years, when people realized with all our advocacy and campaigning, people started coming to us saying, you know, Jaguar Cars wanted to sponsor one of our award ceremonies because they realized there was a lot of money in supporting women's entrepreneurship. So it's about developing that understanding that women are really important to the economy, but it's not just paying lip service to that, it's about understanding their needs and what services and products they actually need that they will utilize. So yeah, it took a lot of time and effort, but we had so much support ultimately.
It shows through your persistence and energy. We feel the energy in this room here, so just to let you know here. All right, let's go to the next speaker here, Dr. Elizabeth Vasquez. She is the CEO and co-founder of the We Connect International, a global network that connects women-owned businesses to qualified buyers around the world. She is a world leader in women's economic empowerment and a global supplier of diversity and inclusion. She is also the co-author of the book, Buying for Impact, How to Buy from Women and Change Our World. I love the title of the book. And she is the member of the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on Women's Economic Empowerment Forum. Dr. Elizabeth, good afternoon here in Paris, but I can say either good morning or good evening, wherever you are. I love the background that you have. So let me start asking you a question. You have been asking for purchasing from women businesses, either small, medium, or large, but you also are sitting in the UN Secretary General of High-Level Panel on Women Economic Empowerment. So you've seen it all, from small, shop to all the way to the General Assembly at the United Nations. Looking at both sides here, what is your reaction saying, this is what I've seen, and this is what always the theme that comes back and back and back in supporting women SMEs, or MSMEs, even micro enterprises? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that wonderful question. And thank you to the ICSB and the OECD for hosting us. And many thanks and congratulations to the authors of the new Entrepreneurship Policies Through a Gender Lens report. It's a really important piece. I've been working for years on this with Virginia Littlejohn. We organized the first OECD conference on women's entrepreneurship in the late 1990s. And I don't feel that old, but apparently I am. And while we've made a lot of progress because of collective action like this, the new report makes it clear that we still have a very long way to go to reach equality in women's entrepreneurship. So regarding what governments should do with urgency, in my opinion, is that they all need to adopt and implement gender inclusive public policy and procurement procedures, because how a government spends its money actually says everything about what it truly values and how it prioritizes. So governments that say that they support gender equality, they have to do a much better job to ensure that at least some of the public procurement is won by the women of their country. Today, women own about 33% of all private businesses, and yet they earn only 1% of spend on products and services by governments and large corporations. This gap is a massive market failure that has to be addressed by governments through public-private partnerships and in partnership with the organizations featured here today, including We Connect International, if we want to actually achieve SDG 5 on gender equality.
That is wonderful here, and I knew you were going to mention SDG 5 because I mentioned the United Nations twice. So I knew you were going to go with that. I have to share something with you, and then I'm going to ask you that question, but just give you some background information. The incoming chair of ICSB, the International Council for Small Business, his name is Dr. Winslow Sargent. On Monday, right, in Chicago, he is one of the founders or directors, was launched the first women's bank in Chicago, and Billie Jean King, the famous tennis player, is one of its main funders of it. So this was history making of itself, but also it was perfect timing with the launch of ICSB World Congress here. You mentioned that We Connect International, right? Talk about the $1 trillion in annual purchasing power of women, right? That there's a potential for it, right? Let's talk about some of the potential impact if we just focus on supporting women businesses and giving them the opportunity to buy from them or purchase from them, and not just in retail, but procurement, government procurement, right? Multinational organizations. I know you had these discussions, and I know you're advocating for many things here, but give us some of your insights, please.
Well, the exciting thing is that women actually control or influence almost $20 trillion in purchasing power. So if they decided tomorrow to just, spend a small percentage of that on other women, we're talking about trillions of dollars into the hands of women instantly, not waiting for policy, not waiting for government or corporate procurement or but individuals understanding their purchasing power and making sure that they benefit from all the innovative solutions that women who own businesses provide to the world. These women, they're not looking for grants. They just want to sell their stuff. And they just want an equal opportunity to be able to do that. We Connect International members, these are the biggest corporations in the world. Their purchasing power is over $1 trillion. So if we could just get all of these corporations, just the ones we work with, to move from 1% on average to 2%, to double it, that means an additional $10 billion into the hands of women business owners every year. And this is money that they've learned to earn. They don't have to repay it in the form of a loan. They don't have to lose equity because it's an investment. They've earned that money, and then they in turn spend it on their employees, their families. We know that they spend it disproportionately compared to men on their communities, which means that we have a ripple effect. When women have more money, they have more assets. Not only do they build businesses that are really strong on ESG, the environment, society, and good governance and transparency, but they just tend to spend more of it on boys and girls and the elderly men and women that they care for, and the communities that they serve. So everyone benefits when women have more assets and control more of it. And entrepreneurship happens to be one of the best ways to get more money into the hands of women as fast as possible. And that's why this research and this data that we collect and that the report points to is so important.
At this point, we're going to get to present Professor Barbara Orser as a discussant, right? She is from the Telfer School of Management, University of Ottawa. She is also a W20 delegation of the Canadian member. She is a co-author of Feminine Capital, Unlocking the Power of Women Entrepreneurs. She is the founding chair of the Canadian Task Force for Women's Business Growth from 2009 to 2011. She is a board member from the Women's Economic Imperative. She conducts research on entrepreneurial feminism, small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs growth, and public policy. Professor Barbara Orser is a full professor and a Deloitte professor in the management of growth enterprises. Her research, teaching, and advocacy focus on entrepreneurship and women's economic empowerment. As you can see from her broad background and her knowledge, she brings across a lot of cutting-edge knowledge, but at the same time a global view. Barbara, we're delighted to have you here. You've been just incredible with the work you have done. The floor is yours.
Well, merci and bonjour à tous. It is my pleasure to be here. And I'm also a former board member of ICSB and your Canadian affiliate. So I'm I'm very aware about the importance of ICSB in creating research, sharing research, and certainly many of your members have over the years driven thought leadership around entrepreneurship policy and women's enterprise policy, including a former president, Lois Stevenson. So really important and honored to be here today. Also want to acknowledge the relationship between the OECD and ICSB because it's unique, and we need those working relationships to bridge significant gaps between the excellent work that academics are undertaking and the kind of information that governments need to inform with evidence the policies that will drive economic growth. So thank you for this opportunity on behalf of my colleagues. And so my job is to pull some of the pieces together of what we've heard today, and then perhaps just augment them with a few perspectives as a participant with the Global WEP OECD publication. So we open this conversation with, I think, the note that we're all familiar with, and that's COVID has impacted women disproportionately. But as Celine has indicated, many of the liquidity constraint measures that have been introduced have been gender blind. And I'm not one that believes that policy is gender neutral unless we consider gender sensitive analysis of budgeting, and that was mentioned today, or gender-based plus analysis to thinking about the intersectional influences. We end up with women receiving less due to eligibility criteria, be it they're not the size threshold or employment threshold, they're not working with banks, which are vehicles for sharing liquidity supports. So we've seen through the pandemic the amplification of these issues and challenges for women entrepreneurs, and yet we see internationally interventions have not yet recognized those impacts. So I think it bodes the message that as we move to recovery, and as evidenced by, let's say, first generation pandemic relief, we need to do a much, much better job at informing and designing policy and program responses that meet the needs of women entrepreneurs. And we have a pretty good idea of what they may be. And our panelists today have spoken to some of the specific kinds of interventions that can support women entrepreneurs. So Kiera and her excellent work with Led by Women really introduces the importance of expertise around understanding lived experience, gender-based violence against women amplified in the pandemic, but now coming to the floor as a key policy issue in many countries needs to be integrated into women's entrepreneurship policy. Her work in creating businesses and collaborating with business schools is innovative. We need her expertise working with her community of interest with the existing infrastructure, that being business schools. So congratulations, Kiera. Outstanding programming with sound expertise leading to life transformations. And then Claire with Tippy demonstrates further the need for expertise. 2,000 SMEs she's generated with her women-focused accelerator. Women-to-women business opportunities, gender-sensitive curricula, and then her expertise being brought into mainstream accelerators, understanding that adding women and stirring is not enough. It is not enough to simply seek to engage more women or double the number of women entrepreneurs, because it doesn't problematize the curricula, the design, the delivery, the culture of existing accelerators and incubators within the mainstream ecosystem. So again, expertise that we need to learn from as we design mainstream and women-focused policies. And her idea of innovation, what is that for? It is to improve our well-being and including our mental health. So when we continue to invest in AI and pharma and bio and forget the outcomes as well as the innovations that women may bring. And we disproportionately say you're not part of that innovation space and investment, it comes at huge social and economic consequences. And then Dinah, recognized for her outstanding global leadership as well as in the UK, has demonstrated clearly the importance of advocacy and networking and the fragility of programming and policy. So we've seen in the UK a policy framework that was very impressive to the world without commensurate funding, without programming. And so with a change of government, it was very easy to dismantle. It was easy to criticize because without that funding, we simply don't have the programs that women need. And it is, I think, a global case study of what not to do, introducing policy without practice or funding. And finally, of course, Elizabeth and the work you're leading globally on procurement. One of the most important policy levers that government has is how they spend. And that was clearly articulated. 1% of spend given to women-owned businesses is appalling in 2021. And we know many governments can't even gauge their spend for various groups of business owners. So the idea of procurement, I think, is a lead policy issue and should be a lead policy issue for many economies because it's how the government spends their money. So again, specialized expertise, insights that can drive policy reform and budgeting. So just a couple of other summative insights, because I know we just have a few minutes left. And these are really points from my observations about contributing to the OECD Global WEP report and my role within the W20 and Women's Economic Imperative. And the first is, as my comments, I hope have illustrated, gender smart entrepreneurship policy needs expertise to inform government. We don't have good mechanisms in play yet for those advisory roles. Too often, governments look to large consultancies for advice, well-branded relationships, forgetting grassroots and feminist organizations that have advocated for those policies. We need better mechanisms to fund those expert organizations to inform policy. And as you've seen clearly in our conversation today, that expertise is needed. It is needed to avoid add women and stir. Government needs to better articulate the underlying assumptions of their policies. And the third point I'll mention is there remains an urgent need to construct comprehensive policy frameworks. And we make this point in our report, of course, metrics, but an additional point to be held accountable for outcomes, because we're still not bringing that into the conversation. And that certainly leads to the fragility of these programs and policies that we've discussed. And we see consequences of that in our report, unintended consequences, such as Germany. And Colette mentioned that when failure to consider dual incomes or emphasizing breadwinners has negative consequences on women's engagement in the paid workforce and women entrepreneurs. Or Ireland, policies without programs, programs without policies. My comment about assumptions. I think it's helpful to take a quick historical perspective, because when we think about policy historically, during the 1970s and 80s, mainstream policies presupposed what worked for women will work for men. And a lot of countries are riding on that now very dated assumption. The work of Emeritus Professor David Story and the late David Smallbone really drove insights about how small business policies can offset liabilities of newness and the economic returns of growth offset the cost of funding programs. But we've moved forward to that to understand that we really do need to take more nuanced looks at policy frameworks. So in 2000, we saw the work of Menu through the OECD that said, no, we've got to also think about economic independence for women aligned with social justice, poverty reduction, and women's self-sufficiency, as well as economic development. 20 years later, a multi-country assessment by OECD researcher David Halabitsky said, okay, we've got underrepresented situations with women in programs, but we need to understand the structural factors, the institutional barriers, the market failures that are leading to this. Today, rationales for women-focused programs continue to evolve with feminist-informed perspectives. Work by Peterson, Al, Nelson, Marlowe, and some of you here today. Contemporary women's entrepreneurship policy is being critiqued as inadequate. And you mentioned, Eamon, the United Nations. Much of the, I think, innovative policy is underscored by the assumption articulated in the UN SDGs, women's economic empowerment and gender equality. And if we can talk about those assumptions right through policy conversations, not just women's entrepreneurship, I think we'll see progress. Finally, we're seeing some interesting innovations in feminist policy interventions, anti-colonial policies, empowerment policies. And I think these are leading to innovative ways of looking at how to make market interventions. An example, Canada's feminist international assistance policy, in which spending must demonstrate by our international partners the impact on girls and women, as well as Canada's women's economic strategy. And Celine mentioned that, as did Colette. It is, I think, an important policy good practice because it includes a commitment to not only doubling the number of women, a $5 billion investment that is in part targeted to increasing access to capital, a commitment to support procurement, a knowledge hub, but also equally important, funding the ecosystem around women entrepreneurs. And if we fund the ecosystem, we build our expertise and we build that advisory capacity. Finally, it's an impressive program because it's a second tranche of investment, so that we're not seeing this as a one-off political op. It looks like there's longevity with this policy commitment. So let me close there. We need constructive policy frameworks, metrics, and accountability by governments, by advisory organizations like the G20, the G7, to say we are accountable to women entrepreneurs in the post-pandemic recovery, and that will be demonstrated in our policies, our investment, and our practices. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a big round of applause here in the room. So I check your laptop if it's shaking or not. That means you got the applause right here because we are hybrid. And Barbara, you've done a fantastic job putting all these presentations together in a way that weaves a story of impact and how to move forward. What I'd like to do now is open it up. I'm going to ask Hannah, who is exceptionally managing this event, to take questions online, right? And then to tell me what the questions are. So let's give them a minute for those online to ask some questions here. But while we're doing this, I want to recognize Canada as being the first partner organization of ICSB when it was first launched. So we always remind them, history-wise, you were the first organization to join ICSB, and also a former president of ICSB, Annette St. Ange, that made the introductions to OECD. So we go back. So there's that Canadian connection that is happening here. So that, and then finally, we lost a dear leader of ICSB, a transformational leadership, David Smallbone. He's very dear to us here. So we want also to recognize him. There are so many other people here. Hannah, do we have any questions?
Yes, we have a question from John Pollard. And he is asking, what is the ecosystem surrounding women entrepreneurs?
So there's a question from John Pollard, and the question is, what is the ecosystem in support of women entrepreneurs? Paraphrase.
I'll take a crack at that.
Okay.
Okay, but before I do, I do want to recognize Dr. Raymond Cow, who is the first president of CCSBE, and the first reason I got involved with entrepreneurship research, and the late David Smallbone, who was my external examiner of my PhD on women entrepreneurs. So it's a small community, but a really important network community that we see today. And I appreciate very much all that leadership that has influenced my work. So the ecosystem, it's fragmented. We have many good practice women-focused programs, networks, but too often they're not integrated, in part due to lack of funding, where many organizations are fighting for small pots of money. We have policy and practice, but no practice and policy. So it really right now is not optimizing the opportunity to lead business to business collaborations, create gender smart training, digital literacy, financial literacy. So you can take the ecosystem and you can overlay it with women-focused organizations, but there's still a gap there as well.
For any other input here, so maybe Claire, why don't you come join us up here and then see if you can answer this question. What about the word ecosystem? I know you hinted about it, that how can we create an ecosystem to help support womenpreneurs? Oh, I have a microphone, perfect.
Yeah. I think that perhaps it's ecosystem where a lot of money is really dedicated to the policy for women entrepreneurship, because without money we can't do anything, and it's just a shame to see that the budget, the minister budget, is so low for that question. And it's you see, it's funny. A good ecosystem will be an ecosystem where big woman CEO would be acknowledged and recognized because of their turnover. For example, when they have a big turnover, well, the male gaze go to them because it's interesting in terms of wealth, you see. And it was exactly what happened in Lyon, is that when I created the incubators 10 years ago, everybody seen us like a little incubator for women, for female, just, well, just play with the economy. And now that we have some big companies, a lot of employees employment created, and now we just exist. And perhaps a good ecosystem is where a government just puts the light on the success of women CEOs and show them on stage, and that will, I think that it will convince a lot of new actors to the benefit of it.
Thank you, excellent. I want to go back to Professor Colette Henry. You're the editor of the book, Female Entrepreneurship, Implications for Education, Training, and Policy. That hits three aspects of an ecosystem, in my opinion here. What is your reaction to this question from Jonathan Potter? And based on your book or your understanding, what's your opinion on it?
Well, in terms of the ecosystem, I mean, as I'd mentioned, in terms of this report, one of the key findings was that some of those policies or programs that don't work, their failure is due to the fact that they're not sufficiently well connected with the rest of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I do think that the entrepreneurial ecosystem for women has failed them somewhat, because the components have very much been designed around the male model. And I mean, it's lovely to hear about these female-led incubators, because, you know, years ago they didn't exist, and we still have a lot of incubators that are mixed genders, and we hear reports from women that they don't feel they fit in there. So I think we need more incubators focused on women, and I think that will really help accelerate their projects. But one other point I'd like to make here is Barbara mentioned the work of other scholars in the field, and obviously there's a lot of work out there. And Barbara, you particularly mentioned the work of Susan Marlowe, who we're all familiar with. She made a really insightful point in one of her papers last year. It was in early 2020. It was actually published in the journal that I edit, International Journal of Gender and Entrepreneurship. And it was a very simple comment, but so insightful. And it was this notion that we all get caught up in trying to ascertain what entrepreneurs can do for the economy. But maybe it's time we need to start asking, what can entrepreneurship do for women? Because, you know, as has been mentioned by Chiara, for example, in her program, we need to make sure that entrepreneurship is a fruitful journey, is beneficial for the woman and the economy. And sometimes that means starting out on that journey, they will fail, but they will have learned a lot and they can use that. So I think we need to turn the conversation to, you know, what is the benefit to women in engaging in entrepreneurship?
Chiara, she mentioned you here, so you're back on center stage here. So it's Chiara. Okay. My God. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Chiara. So it's a two-part question here to address Jonathan Potter's question about ecosystem and how can it support women entrepreneurs. But we also mentioned, we just heard here a minute ago, that it somewhat did not really work well with women. You're in the trenches. You created your organization and you've seen it all. Some insights or some light on this topic, and you can take it in any angle you want. What's your thoughts on the ecosystem and women? And has it been working or can it be better?
Yeah, so for me, when I think in an ecosystem, I think, you know, of exactly like a forest. And if you think of a plant in a forest, it needs water, it needs its neighboring plants, it needs everything else in the forest, the temperature, everything to be right in order to be able to grow. And I think the same exact thing is true of a woman entrepreneur. So, you know, you have the women entrepreneur and you need to provide a woman entrepreneur with training, but then you also need to provide her with support. And then you also need to provide her with a network. You know, and a lot of women, for example, they don't succeed because they don't have a network. So, you know, they don't have friends and family to go ask funds for. They don't have those first clients that are really hard to come by. They don't have access to those things that make it a lot easier to become entrepreneurs. And then once you know, get women and train them, then you also need to finance them and find funding. So that's kind of like part of the ecosystem as well. So it's, to me, it's everything that makes entrepreneurship possible. And that's why, you know, entrepreneurship works better in certain places than others. It's because that ecosystem around is much more developed. I mean, think about how much harder it would be to become an entrepreneur if you have absolutely nobody to go sell your first products to, or nobody who's going to help you look over your business plan, or absolutely nobody there to support you. So I think that's the thing. There's no miracle to entrepreneurship. Creating programs is a lot of hard work, and you have to put in all those elements. You have to put in the training, you have to put in the mentoring, and you need to put in the support and the network. And often I think where I see a lot of other incubators, et cetera, failing is that they don't offer enough of that network. That is really, really important. Now, helping women, I think, is also very different from working with men, especially when women are going through different things in their lives. And because we work with women who come from very difficult situations, I see this a lot. So I really think that programs that today we say are mixed, they are actually created with our inherent cultural biases, which connect entrepreneurship as being male, and we build them around men and not around women. So I don't think that many women that I help, for example, would never step in there, and I think it's keeping women out. So I think we need to rethink things as in serving women, looking at the realities of the lives that women lead, and building things around those realities, rather than asking women to fit to a model that it was not created for them, which is, I think, what we're doing right now.
Thank you. Thank you. And there's one more question I'm going to ask here, but before I ask it, 2 years ago, when we were planning this World Congress here, we approached our partners in OECD, and in particular, we approached Dr. Lucia Kuzmano about the idea for women panel session here. So, Lucia, a heartfelt thank you from ICSB for working with us the last 2 years and putting it together, and also with Celine here now. But Lucia is with us. She's with us online, and it's a hybrid, so it's equal. She has a question she asks us. She goes, COVID-19 has widened gender gaps in labor force participation dramatically in some countries. Does it mean we should also expect a lost generation of womenpreneurs or women entrepreneurs here? So let me ask this question, right, to Elizabeth Vasquez, because she brings in a very interesting perspective on both sides. Have we lost a generation, Elizabeth, and what can we do about it?
So thanks for the question. It is true that the women business owners we serve, they are based in 130 countries. And we quarterly survey them to understand the specific impacts of COVID on their businesses, so that we're not assuming the impacts and we're not assuming everything is devastating, because there is a lot of devastation. There are a lot of businesses that are closing their doors. The vast majority of the businesses we serve have been negatively impacted. Having said that, the ones that have survived, and the majority in our network have survived so far, have proven themselves to be incredibly resilient. And 54% of them have identified ways to cut unnecessary expenses. 40% have shifted to a digital business model. So leveraging technology has been a top priority that they have done successfully. 35% of them identified new business opportunities. Many of them we saw were in one type of manufacturing and quickly pivoted to being able to manufacture personal protective gear, hand sanitizers, when their country had no access to or limited access to these types of products or services. 34% of them are creating a new business line in response to global needs, or they're growing a new area of their business. So yes, it has been devastating, but I can tell you that the women business owners of the world have stepped up to directly address the major local, regional, and global challenges that we're all facing. And we should all be really proud and grateful for what they've done for all of us.
Dina, the question is to you now. Your thoughts, have we lost a generation, or we have just discovered 3 new generations coming up that have a different view in the world and just going to be incredible? What do you think?
I'm the real eternal optimist, and I'd like to believe we haven't lost a generation, because I don't believe that we should be fixing the women. As women business owners, entrepreneurs, they don't need fixed. It's the structures and systems that have to be addressed. It's the policy that needs to be gender sensitive. And as a women business owner, you're constantly juggling a whole range of interdependencies of bankers, accountants, your customers, suppliers. And so it's very, very important. We go back to that ecosystem question. They need to be made gender aware. Barbara's got an amazing program in gender smart entrepreneurship training. We should be looking at the systems instructions from the get-go. So I do believe we've got a positive future, but let's look at the structures and systems that are there to support the women. Let's educate them. Let's educate and change these systems.
I want to do a closing remark, and then finally, as moderator, I'm just going to give you my personal opinion here. While we have acknowledged there's still quite a ways to go when it comes to closing the gender gap in entrepreneurship and small business, it is clear from this session today that there is no shortage of passionate, well-thought avenues to do so. Whatever the issue that arises, we can be assured that there are talented, considerate leaders, transformational leaders, behind the scenes, working together, making the gap smaller and smaller. We thank our generous keynote speakers, panelists, and discussants for sharing their time, expertise with us today. And we thank you, attendees, online and in person, for showing up for this issue that really matters. Thank you. Now my personal comments. I think there's 3 themes that came out of this session today. First, what I saw here is the importance of this issue. It cannot just be one session. This has to be consistent across the year. 2 is that women leaders here, and let's remove the word woman and just say leaders in this session, right? You are amazing and transformational, and we need more support to you. We need more to help lead this world. And then finally, I think we should do this again. And then invite everybody, and Celine and I talked about this, the ICSB World Congress is going to be in Washington, D.C. next year in July. And we hope, with the leadership of Winslow Sargent, that we will have a day or some sessions at the U.S. Congress. So we invite you all to come to Washington, D.C. and to continue this discussion, but to work throughout the year with the work with OECD and the report that just published and the issues that are coming out, even ICSB's journal coming with a gender issue in August, to continue this dialogue. There's many venues to do it. So I want to thank you all. But before I end, we have a partner here, and I want to ask Celine to come up and close the session for us with some of her words, because it's only fair that partners speak. And the microphone is there. Let me just bring it for you.
Thank you very much, Iman, and thank you to all that contributed today. I think you said it all, Iman. We'd be really thrilled to actually continue working with you all, ICSB, of course, under the leadership of you, Iman, and Winslow as well, but also all those participants that I see on screen and that made the discussion of today so accurate, so forward-looking as well. I want to thank as well the OECD team that you don't necessarily see on the screen, but that worked very hard on the report. Heather, that is in the room as well, and contributed to the organization, and Anna from ICSB that did a wonderful job of organizing today. So it's a big yes for continuing that work, and I'll see you in Washington next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Let's ready.